The Island of Sodor, Its People, History and Railways. Written by the Reverend Wilbert Audrey and George Audrey. Read aloud by Scrapyard Studios. Part 2, Section 2, Branch Lines. The Norrenby Branch. Ballyhoo, the farm of the River Hoo. Ballyhoo is now a dormitory town for Barrow. It is served by the NWR/BR suburban service from Barrow, half-hourly at peak periods and 1-hourly intervals at others. Norrenby, originally Normanby, the Bay of the Normans. A Norman army landed here in 1089. Rooted at Crovan's Gate, they fled back to their ships, only to find that most had either been burnt or captured. Norrenby is now an attractive seaside residential town. It has safe sandy beaches and is a popular holiday resort for mainlanders. It is the terminus of the NWR/BR joint suburban service. The Kirk Ronan Branch. Rolf's Castle. Rolwer, or Rolf, was Bishop of Sodor and Man from 1070 to 79 and built himself a fortified residence here. He also began rebuilding the church, later Cathedral, of St. Luach in Sudbury. Rolf died in 1079 while on a visit to the Isle of Man and was buried at Kirkmarhold. The bishop's house is now in Sudbury, and Rolf's Castle, rebuilt in 1665 after being dismantled by Cromwellians, is now a conference centre. Kirk Ronan, the Church of St. Ronan. Ronan, with Brendan and Abban, were 6th century Irish missionaries. Till the 1860s, the place was a fishing port. In 1865, it was reached by the Sodor and Mainland Railway, S&MR, which was the first standard gauge railway in the island. They hoped to start a steamer service from Kirk Ronan to Dublin. This project failed, but the Crovan's Gate Mining Company used it extensively for the shipment of ore. In 1920 to 25, the NWR started daily sailings to Dublin and had enough success to disturb the LMS. Sailings to Dublin still continue, but following the agreement of 1925, they are on Tuesdays and Fridays as a local service only. References: the Scarlery Railways No. 1 was shipped from Whitehaven to Kirk Ronan in 1865 and before dock manage had been installed. Very old engines, page 9. The Peel Godred Branch. In their Act of 1853, the S&M obtained powers to build a branch line to Peel Godred, but never did so. As their successors, the NWR inherited these powers. In 1923, the Peel Godred Power Company, a subsidiary to the British Aluminium Company, was formed to build a hydroelectric station utilising the waters of the three lakes, Corlowy, Dubban Moor and Lowy Matchin. A standard gauge railway was needed to transport their bulky equipment since the clearances on the narrow gauge Mid-Sodor Railway were inadequate. They agreed accordingly with the NWR, who had powers to construct, to pay half the cost of building a branch to serve their works, leaving the main line at Kildane. The branch was built as a light railway, and as the gradients are heavy, it was agreed that it should be worked by electric locomotives on current supplied by the power company. The traffic is mainly in freight, but 8 passenger trains run each way daily from Kildane. 4 of these run to and from Cronk, the locomotive exchange being made at Kildane. The branch line serves 3 stations. Abbey. This is now an unstaffed halt, serving Cronk Abbey School and Village. It was built in 1923 as a private station. The land from the Abbey estate needed for the railway was given by the owner, Albert Regaby, Viscount Harwick, chairman of the NWR, on condition that a station was provided for his family and tenants. Cronk Abbey has been the Regaby family seat since 1540 when, on the delusion of the Abbey, it came into the hands of Sir Geoffrey Regaby, King's agent in Sodor. Michael Colden, the last abbot, became the first bishop of Sudbury. Sir Geoffrey turned part of the abbey into a mansion and founded and endowed a grammar school in some of the remainder. In 1870, the school, needing to expand, bought more land from Lord Frederick Regaby. When his grandson, Lord Harry, succeeded to the estate in 1947, he was faced with crippling death duties and sold the remainder to the school. He now lives in a small house on the outskirts of Sudbury. The school, now a recognised public school, has developed on the model of King William's College, Isle of Man. It has an excellent reputation. It has some 400 boys and a long waiting list. Abbey Station is normally unstaffed, but at the beginning and end of each term, when special school trains are run, staff are drafted in to cope. There are, so far, no references to it in the books. Kirkmatchen. The village lies at the foot of Culdee Fell, the mountain of the Companion of God. Saint Matchen came over from Ireland in the latter half of the 6th century. He was of a solitary turn of mind and lived alone in a cave on the mountain. Nevertheless, he became a legendary figure and people came to him from far and near. Even after his death, his cave remained a place of pilgrimage and it is still something of a national shrine. A church dedicated to him was built at the foot of the mountain in the 11th century on the foundations of one still older, and a hospice of pilgrims was erected nearby in the 12th century, staffed by brothers from Cronk Abbey. A village grew up around them. The hospice is now a hotel, but the proprietor is glad to show the oldest parts of his premises to interest visitors and explain their former use. The station at Kirkmatchen is the property of the Culdee Fell Railway, opened in 1900 to take people up the mountain. The Peel Godred branch trains use the eastern face of the Mountain Railway's arrival platform, paying rent for the facility. The Mountain Railway closes down from Michaelmas to Easter, and the station is then unstaffed, but a staff of at least 6 are needed to cope with the traffic on both railways during the summer. The NWR has laid in a passing loop which is pressed into service at busy times. On its way northward, the branch has to swing eastward to avoid the Mountain Railway's workshops. Traffic exchange of light goods and parcels is normally done at the passenger platform, but an exchange siding has also been provided north of the Mountain Railway's works. Here, the 2-foot 7.5 gauge rails lie alongside a siding from the NWR branch so that locomotives and other weighty equipment can be transferred conveniently. Mountain Engines, page 31. King Ory's Bridge. Leaving Kirkmatchen, a train for Peel Godred burrows under the Rack Railway and crosses the River Ab by a plate girder bridge. Away to the left, a substantial road bridge has been built to bypass a bridge of medieval construction which stands by our side, i.e. east, of the new structure. The name is not strictly accurate, as this bridge replaced the ford, which was the only way of crossing the river in King Ory's time. It was at this ford that in 984, King Ory, Godred I, trapped and routed a strong invading force led by Sigurd the Stout, Earl of Orkney. Peel Godred, the railway tunnels under the east end of the hill on which the town is built to reach a station on the northern side. Peel Godred is a good example of a burg or walled fortress town. It dates from before the time of Godred II. It was probably Godred I, King Ory, king of 979 to 989, who turned the Peel or Tower of Refuge into a fort and surrounded the town with a wooden stockade. Godred II, Crovan, improved on his grandfather's work and had, by 1070, turned it from a stockade fortress into a completely walled town. He made it his headquarters during his conquest of the Isles, Dublin and Man. Throughout its long and honourable history, Peel Godred has been many times besieged but never taken. Even the Cromwellians failed to get near enough to use their artillery effectively. There is a first-class hotel in the marketplace, reputedly built on the site of Godred Crovan's Hall. Its name has recently been changed from the rather prosaic Crovan's Arms to the more striking White Gauntlet. This, says the landlord, a local historian of some repute, is a reminder of the fact that Godred II was given the nickname of Crovan from his custom of wearing white leather gloves or gauntlets in battle. Peel Godred is the main depot of the Sodor regiment. Their colours are sable 2 gloves argent salterwise, charged in fess with the rose of Lancaster proper. The Sodor Aluminium Works. Beyond the town station and goods yard, the line continues for a mile or so before fanning out into sidings at the aluminium works. The Sodor Aluminium Company, a subsidiary to the British Aluminium Company, was formed in 1926 to own and operate the power company above mentioned. The carriage of alumina from Tidmouth to Peel Godred and of ingots to England via Barrow has been a source of steady revenue to the NWR. This, together with general goods and passenger traffic, enables the Peel Godred to more than pay its way. The Brendan Branch. This branch formed part of the main line of the Wellsworth and Sudbury Railway, W&S, opened in 1870, running from Crosby to Brendan. This eastern end was demoted to branch status when the NWR main line was built in 1915. It joined the W&S at what is now called Sudbury Junction. The branch is an important one and carries considerable traffic. In addition to serving the island's capital, Sudbury, the china clay beds near Brendan generate a great deal of freight working. The line is known in the books as Edwards Branch Line, and latterly, see Mainline Engines, BOCO has been engaged to assist, but these two are by no means the only motive power employed. Free passenger services for commuters to and from Tidmouth are provided between 8 and 10 a.m. Edward the Blue engine pages 18 to 31 and 5 to 7 p.m. mainline engines pages 34 and 35. This service is supplemented at other times by push-pull trains from Wellsworth. Sudbury. Sudbury is the capital city and administrative centre of the island. Tradition has it that St. Luoch landed from his coracle on the shores of Sudbury Bay. In proof of this, visitors to St. Luoch's Cathedral are shown in the crypt the remains of the keel or chapel, which he built for himself on landing. Luoch in the 5th century was the first Christian missionary to reach Sodor. The city's arms perpetuate the legend of his miraculous arrival. They show the saint arrayed as a bishop standing in a coracle and holding his crozier. Below is the city's motto, Luoch Sodoris Lux, translating to Luoch, the light of Sodor. A small church was built on the site in the 10th century, but work on a cathedral was begun by Bishop Rolf in 1071, who seemed to have preferred it to that inconveniently placed on Peel Island, Isle of Man. Work was continued by his successor Hammond, but it then suffered a long period of neglect and by 1392 was in such a poor state that an appeal, blessed by the Pope, was made to the faithful urging them to give alms for reparation of the Church of Sodor. Sudrians always maintained that these monies were misappropriated, for instead of being used for their clearly defined purpose, the repair of St. Luoch's, Sudbury, which is undoubtedly the Church of Sodor, they were diverted to repair the church on Peel Island. A period of, quote, make do and mend followed with authorities doing what they could with what little monies were available. Eventually, in the 16th century, with funds released for the purpose by the dissolution of Cronk Abbey, it was restored and rebuilt in Tudor style by the first two bishops of Sudbury, Michael Colden, 1540 to 1565, and Timothy Smeal, 1565 to 1594. It is as small as cathedrals go, being perhaps on a par with Hereford in size, but whereas Hereford has Norman grandeur and solidity, Sudbury, with its Tudor perpendicular, has the large windows which give it a grace and lightness all of its own. As the capital of the island, Sudbury was fortified, but the castle is relatively late in date. It was built at the end of the 12th century to fill a gap in the city's defences after a Manx raiding party had redeemed their failure to enter and loot the city by making off with several ships. A castle was therefore built overlooking the harbour. It was a Norman-type castle with a keep, and was always held by the city and never by a baron. It was blown up by parliamentary troops during the Great Rebellion, and the shattered masonry slid down into the harbour. The site, a commanding one, was refortified during the Napoleonic Wars, but the batteries built then have not spoilt its appearance. The blown-up masonry in the harbour eventually created a bar, preventing its use by shipping, except of the very smallest draught. Since all attempts at dredging have proved costly failures, the mayor and corporation made a virtue out of necessity. If they could not have shipping of one sort, they would have it of another. The docks have been turned into a flourishing marina which draws yachtsmen from all parts, and the Sudbury Regatta has been spoken of as the northern counterpart to Cowes. Since the docks cannot be used for any but the lightest traffic, the former rail connection has been taken up and the station resited more conveniently for the city. Brendam. The White Mountains, visible some 2 or 3 miles to the northwest of Brendam, are spoil heaps of quartz and sand from the China clay pits. The clay is used to make porcelain, paper, paint, plastics, medicines and cosmetics. It is shipped from Brendam all over the world. This is a recent development. Till 1949, Brendam was a quiet fishing village where apparently nothing much ever happened. In the early 1900s, the Wellsworth and Sudbury Railway extended to Brendam and built jetties there intending to use it as a port. But after a few years, they abandoned the project and transferred to Tidmouth. The fishermen were glad of the jetties and the railway, but carried on as before. The village had grown up round the mouth of a small river. St. Brendan's Church, though small, has a conspicuous 15th century tower standing slightly apart from the main building. It was erected as a landmark to guide boats along the only safe channel by which to enter the harbour. Now, the pattern of life has changed. Fishing has declined, and the majority of the now 4,500 inhabitants are employed in one way or another by the Sodor China Clay Company. The clay beds were discovered in 1948 and a company formed to work them. A new harbour, capable of accommodating ocean-going vessels, was built some 1.5 miles south of the old one, and a private railway laid down to link the workings with the harbour and the NWR. This line is worked by the clay company's own locomotives, as seen in mainline engines. There has, naturally, been considerable housing development, not only round the harbour, but also on the hillside above the old village. Great care has been taken to ensure that the new buildings shall harmonise with the old. The clay company and their architects have succeeded admirably in this. Much more difficult has been the establishment of a harmonious relationship between the two communities, being affectionately nicknamed the Villagers and the Clay Boys, the old inhabitants and the new. But now, after nearly 50 years, there are welcome signs that the two communities are at last fusing into one. There has been a girls' school on the hills above Brendam since 1873. Lady Margaret Cranstoul, the daughter of an East India Company, nabob, was a wealthy woman in her own right, besides inheriting her husband's estate. When she died in 1870, being a childless widow, she left her house in the state for the establishment of a school for girls, quote, so that they may enjoy the same advantages as their brothers do at Cronk Abbey. At present, there are some 200 girls in the school, and the headmistress is Mrs. I.M. Bilbus. References: Bill, Ben and Boko, mainline engines, pages 4 to 15. Bill, Ben and Gordon, mainline engines, pages 36 to 43. Bill and Ben on a brake van special, mainline engines, page 47. The Farquhar branch. Knapford Junction. The first railway in the area was from Elsbridge to Knapford. We now call this the Harbour Line. Opened in 1885, it was lightly built and horse-worked. It ran from the wharf at Elsbridge to that at Knapford, cutting out the hazardous shipment stage down the river. It curved east from Elsbridge to Tory Wreck Mine, and keeping the firmest ground, swung round in a wide curve to reach Knapford. But Knapford Harbour proved a disappointment. It needed constant dredging, and by 1905 the cost had become prohibitive. The mining company abandoned it and extended the line along A.W. Dry's road to Tidmouth round the headland, using light locomotives for haulage. These were built for them by Topham Hatt, A.W. Dry's young engineer recently arriving from Swindon. In 1908, however, this line was destroyed in a storm. Great distress and unemployment resulted. To alleviate this, A.W. Dry, with the help of a Treasury loan, employed out-of-work miners to cut a tunnel through the ridge south of Tidmouth, and the first train of the newly formed Tidmouth, Knapford and Elsbridge Light Railway steamed through in July 1910. In 1912 came amalgamation with the Wellsworth and Sudbury Railway, who also had their eyes on Tidmouth, and tunnelled through the ridge west of Crosby to join the TK&D at Knapford. Knapford was now a junction, but both station and junction were then on the south side of the river. Following the building of the North Western Railway in 1915-16, the Elsbridge traffic was still worked by Topham Hatt's vertical boiler engines, but it was relegated to a bay platform on the east side of the station. Elsbridge trains no longer worked to and from Tidmouth. The rundown of the Tory Wreck mines began in 1925, but quarries near Farquhar gave promise of new traffic, and it was decided to extend the line to serve them. Topham Hatt's locomotives were not considered adequate for the longer haul, so after a probationary period at Wellsworth, Thomas was given the job. Thomas the Tank Engine, pages 60 to 63. He was alone at first, with the vertical boiler engines as spares in case of emergency. Later, an ex-Great Eastern Railway tram locomotive, Toby, was acquired to comply with Ministry of Transport regulations for the roadside extension to the quarry. In 1956-57, Sir Topham Hatt launched his Knapford Harbour Improvement Scheme to relieve congestion at Tidmouth, and Percy was transferred from Tidmouth to help. Percy the Small Engine, page 24. Considerable rearrangement was needed. Knapford Station and Junction were moved from south to north of the river, and a new branch line was built on an easier gradient joining the old branch, now the Harbour Line, at Toywreck. The Harbour Line now carries freight only, Percy the Small Engine and tramway engines, together with occasional excursions, Percy the Small Engine, pages 50 to 63, and is worked mainly by Percy and Toby. The passenger traffic to and from the junction is Thomas's responsibility. Since 1964, he has been assisted in this by Daisy, a diesel railcar. It is to be noted that the race between Bertie and Thomas, recorded in Tank Engine Thomas again, took place in 1948, and therefore before the shorter line was built. The junction station was then on the south side of the river, and from Knapford to Toywreck, Thomas ran on what is now called the Harbour Line. See original map on page 154. Dry ore. The hutments built by A.W. Dry for his workpeople behind the first reclamation bank were rebuilt in permanent form as brick or stone cottages when footing became firm enough to support them. These formed the nucleus of a village. As work went on, more and more land to the west was drained and settled, mostly in plots of 1 or 2 acres. The soil, when leached of salt, proved fertile and now supports prosperous market gardens. A heliport belonging to the Coast Guard Service is near the east bank of the river. Dryor has 2 railway stations. The old one on the harbour line is now a goods depot with a staff of 2 responsible to the station master of Elsbridge. It is near the village centre. Workmen's trains stop here, as do most goods trains, and it is not unknown for goods guards to have a van full of passengers on market days for Elsbridge or Knapford, as the case may be. The passenger station is on the main branch, somewhat away from the village. It is unstaffed, has a good car park, and a service of 7 trains each way is provided. References: Harold Helicopter, Race, Percy the Small Engine, pages 36 to 49. The hay cutting mentioned in the story took place about half a mile west of Dryor on the harbour line. Tramway engines, pages 19 and 25. Tory Wreck. Tory Wreck's origin was, in many ways, similar to that of Dryor, but began earlier. Being on slightly higher ground, A.W. Dry and the mining company decided to make their headquarters here. After the somewhat shaky start mentioned above, see Knapford, the lead mine prospered for a time but had to close down in 1930. Latterly, however, discovery of uranium in the old workings had led to their reopening, and the mine's future looks fair for the present. The main branch joins the harbour line south of Tory Wreck Station, which has a staff of 5 responsible to the Elsbridge station master. There is a goods shed here. A cattle dock and coal staves are also provided. The station has a passing loop, but only 1 platform. The loop is not often used, but comes in handy at busy times and in emergencies. References: Thomas falls down Toy Wreck mine, Gordon the Big Engine, pages 38 to 47. Thomas gets shunted at Toy Wreck for Stepney Special to pass, Stepney the Bluebell Engine, page 25. Crow's Crossing is on the harbour line between the spur to the mine and the junction, Tramway Engines, pages 6 to 9. Accident at above reported at Toy Wreck Junction signal box, Tramway Engines, page 10. Elsbridge. St. Pedrock's church tower is visible for miles across the fen and marks the site of a century-old river crossing at the end of the path through the bog, known only to local people. Even natives were sometimes confused of the thick mists often covering the area. In September 1758, Peter Carnane, an Elsbridge shopkeeper, was caught in just such a mist and only found direction and safety when he heard the church clock strike. Accordingly, he bequeathed land to the vicar and churchwardens, directing that the rent thereof be used to pay for the ringing of a bell daily during the half hour before sunset, quote, forever. A tablet in the church records this bequest. The need for it has gone, but a token ringing of the Carnane bell continues to this day. Another tablet records the building of the town bridge by public subscription in 1779/80 and gives a list of the principal contributors. It was needed to replace an old and dilapidated packhorse bridge. The road width was 15 feet between parapets, quite generous for those days. In 1927 it was widened, but great care was taken to preserve its original design and appearance. For many years it carried two-way traffic, but with the increased width of vehicles this became dangerous and the traffic flow is now alternate and controlled by lights. Tank Engine Thomas again, page 57. It has 5 arches and not 10 as shown in the picture. Tank Engine Thomas again, page 19. Nor is the river as wide as the artist suggests. The bridge is a pleasing structure, full of character, built by local masons to meet a local need, and Elsbridgians are proud of it. If Elsbridge is proud of its road bridge, the railway people are certainly proud of theirs. It was intended as a showpiece from the first. It happened like this. From 1910 to 1925, Elsbridge was the terminus of the branch line. The NWR had powers to extend, but money was short, and the necessary bridge and tunnel were likely to prove expenses, so nothing was done. In 1924, however, Jabez Krouari began quarrying at Farquhar. He needed 2 things, a railway to transport and an attractive structure to show potential customers the quality of his stone. Hard bargaining followed with Topham Hatt. In the end, the NWR agreed to extend their line on condition that the quarry company not only provided stone for the bridge free of charge, but also undertook to bear half the cost of the tunnel at Hackenbeck. The bridge was designed by Mr. Michael Kirk, ARIBA of Cathedral Chambers, Sudbury, who, on Topham Hatt's suggestion, based his design on that of I.K. Brunel for the Great Western Railway at Maidenhead. Tank Engine Thomas again, page 19. It was completed in 1925 and has since needed only minimal maintenance, thus giving excellent testimony to the qualities of Farquhar stone. Elsbridge is a pleasant small town of some 4,500 inhabitants. It has a flour mill and bakery together with several small firms specialising in different forms of agricultural engineering. But the largest employer is St Pedrock's Dairy, situated in what was once a glebe field behind the village and adjacent to the station. The dairy has won fame for its Callan cheese and Aylesdale butter, the latter being made from the milk of cows pasted in the rich water meadows along the upper reaches of the Ells. The Curragh or Fenland Museum is a must for visitors. In addition to items both domestic and industrial collected from the neighbourhood and imaginatively displayed, life in the fen is depicted both before and after drainage began 100 years ago. Most of the land on the west bank is by now drained and cropped, but some 4,000 acres were left untouched and are preserved by the Sodor Nature Conservancy Trust as a wildlife sanctuary. The banks of the Upper Ells are beloved of anglers, many of whom come year after year with great regularity. These tend to stay at the two hotels, the Trout and the Char, which cater admirably for their needs and which own most of the fishing rights. Visitors with other interests will find comfortable accommodation elsewhere. The Railway Hotel in Station Road and the bridge in Olsted Street are highly recommended. Elsbridge is an attractive place, well served by public transport, and from it to northward the visitor has ready access to some of the most beautiful parts of the island. References: bridges. In addition to the reference mentioned above, there is one other, mainline engines, page 29. Station, tank engine Thomas again, page 21. The station may have looked like this in the early days of the Farquhar extension, but it bears no resemblance to the building of today. Tramway engines, page 27, is near to what it looks like today. The best pictures are in Thomas's Christmas Party, pages 21 and 22. Outskirts, south, the Elsbridge Cricket Club ground, Stepney the Bluebell engine, pages 31, 33 and 41, is on the east side of the railway, about a mile southwest of the station. North, Callendale, Daisy meets a bull about 3/4 of a mile north of the bridge, branch line engines, pages 33, 35 and 37. Thomas and Bertie race neck and neck, tank engine Thomas again, pages 57 and 59. Caroline chases Stepney, Stepney the Bluebell engine, pages 35 and 37. Thomas chases some robbers, really useful engines, pages 13 and 15. Farquhar. The oldest part of the village stands astride the Arlesburg/Olvstead Road. In the troubled times of the Regency, 1263 to 1404, a fort stood here as an outpost for Olvstead Castle. Following the island's acceptance of Henry IV as overlord in 1404, the fort fell into disuse and little remains except the hillock on which it once stood. It is still called the fort, but looking at some of the older houses in the village, it is easy to see where most of the masonry went. Some was used to repair the church, St Finans, which mainly dates from the 13th century, but has a tower of much earlier date. This is circular and massively built. Curiously, it cannot be entered, except by a ladder from inside the church, and seems to have been intended as a peel or tower of refuge. With its importance as an outpost gone, Farquhar sank out of the mainstream of events and led a peacefully rural existence for the next few centuries. A scattered community of hill farmers grew barley and oats, but the emphasis was, and still is, largely on cattle and sheep. The Sodor Blackpoll is a hardly dual-purpose breed, producing good mutton and also quality fleeces, which, formerly spun and woven at home, are now worked up into fine cloth at the Olvstead woolen mills. In former days, farmers only kept enough cows to supply their own and local needs, but with the coming of the railway, larger herds have become profitable, the milk being dispatched twice daily to the dairy at Elsbridge. Mechanisation has been slow to take hold, but is nevertheless here to stay. A visitor to Thomas Cousin's workshop will see implements of incredible antiquity in for repair, standing, as it were, side by side with the latest from Massey Ferguson or Fordson. Thomas Cousins began as the village blacksmith. Now under his son and grandson, the firm are agricultural engineers to a wide district. It is their boast that they can supply and repair any implement needed on any farm. They will even undertake to devise, quote, one-off implements needed for awkward or peculiar situations. It is impossible to be in Farquhar or anywhere else in West Sodor without being reminded of Felgood's famous Farquhar ales. It was in the 1850s that Josiah Felgood set up his first brewery, and much of which still remains. It is now in the hands of his great-grandson, German. Visitors are welcome, and though Felgers have breweries elsewhere, any real ale experts can always tell a Farquhar brew from that of anywhere else. The Hackenbeck water, they say, makes all the difference. Try it for yourself at the brewery or the Free Beetles at Hackenbeck, or better still, at the Toby in Farquhar. The Toby was originally the Toby Jug, but the landlord was so delighted when Toby came and put an officious police constable in his place that he had Toby's picture painted on his signboard instead of the jug. This young policeman perhaps hoped to gain promotion and a reputation for zeal by enforcing laws which were out of date and which had been quietly forgotten. He drove Farquhar's innkeepers nearly crazy with obscure points in the licensing laws and scored a success against Thomas. But when, one Sunday morning, he prowled outside the church taking the numbers of the cars he saw there, he found too late that he had booked not only the vicar, but John Crewery, the chairman of the local bench and magistrates, as well as his own sergeant. That was the outside of enough. The quote criminals were fined half a penny each, and he was speedily transferred elsewhere amid general rejoicing. It was John Crewery's father, Jabez, principal landowner in Farquhar, who, feeling the preach after World War I, floated the Farquhar Quarry Company to mine the stone under his land on an Over Fell, and in furtherance of this, persuaded the NWR to extend from Elsbridge to Farquhar. Since then, the village has increased in population from 350 in 1921 to 2,405 in 1981. The quarry company employed some 400 people either underground or at the cutting and curing sheds. Farquhar is railhead for the district. There had been talk of a further extension to Olvested, but there were difficulties, and following an agreement with Sodor Roadways, the idea was dropped. The station has one passenger platform with a run-round loop. A milk dock, cattle dock, coal staves and an oil depot are provided, together with two goods sheds, one for local traffic and one for goods in transit via Sodor Roadways. The station forecourt is a regular calling place for Sodor Roadways coaches, whose timetable and that of the branch are coordinated to make connections with all trains possible. 10 trains are provided each way daily. This is adequate for normal needs, but the timetable allows pass for extra trains if required at busy times. Farquhar's people are fond of their railway and enjoy its waywardness and eccentricities, when they are not on the receiving end, of course. But what they do not like is misrepresentation. Your author has been severely criticised for the pictures of the station shown in the early books. The kindest comments, however, came from Mr. Kevin Volley, a former station master of Farquhar from 1936 to 56. He retired in 1968 and now lives at Farquhar. In a letter dated Farquhar 23rd of August 1983, which is before me as I write, he describes the pictures in Tank Engine Thomas again and Toby the Tram Engine as, quote, highly imaginative, and then goes on to elaborate. I cannot think, he writes, that the artist had ever seen the place he was attempting to draw. Taking first the pictures in Tank Engine Thomas again, pages 39 and 41, he goes on, your artist was right about the brick-built engine shed, and the way in which the quarry line is first built did curve away to the north as shown in order to give a longer run, thus easing the gradient up to the workings. For part of my time at Farquhar, we had one or other of Mr. Hatt's vertical boiler engines up here to work the quarry line. Why, we used to call them the coffee pots because of the way they coughed and panted. They were both remarkable machines, and it is a great pity no one thought of photographing them before they were scrapped. They were, however, deficient in brake power, and heavy loads sometimes got out of hand. That was why Thomas was sent up on occasion, and it was on one of those trips that inferring young policeman caught him. The stone cutting and curing shed used to be up at Anofa, but it was soon found more convenient to have them at the station. We needed some cottages near the station too, so we realigned the quarry extension to run as it does today, between the cottage and the engine shed, Stepney the Bluebell engine, page 29, and branch line engines, page 9, crossing the Olvested Road into the lane. Branch line engines, page 49, and tramway engines, pages 35, 37, 39, and 43. The brick-built carriage shed, seen above Annie's roof in Tank Engine Thomas again, page 41, was pulled down when the track alterations were made after Toby had arrived, for we then needed a two-road shed to house Toby's Henrietta, as well as Annie and Clarabelle. Daisy, Mr. Volley goes on, now shares the coach shed with Annie and Clarabelle. Tramway engines, page 31. For Henrietta and her guards van, Elsie, are generally shedded overnight with Toby down at Knapford. With regards to the passenger station, he continues, the pictures shown in Tank Engine Thomas again, pages 27, 29 and 41 are widely inaccurate. There has never, repeat never, been a two-platform station at Farquhar, nor have the platform and station buildings ever been on the south side, as shown in these pictures. The platform and buildings shown in branch line engines, pages 17, 19 and 43 are fair but incomplete representations of the station, as it has been from the very first. You apologise for bombarding me with questions and causing me trouble. Please don't be concerned. I'm delighted to help clear up misconceptions which have vexed us all here. References to some events which have happened at Farquhar. Fish and Chips Supper, Tank Engine Thomas again, pages 26 to 33. Thomas and the Snowplow, Tank Engine Thomas again, pages 38 to 47. Thomas Comes to Breakfast, Branch Line Engines, pages 6 to 15. Daisy Blows a Fuse, Branch Line Engines, page 25. Percy's Predicament, Branch Line Engines, pages 51 and 53. The Cricket Ball Rescue, Stepney the Bluebell Engine, page 39. The Ghost Trick, Tramway Engines, pages 14 to 17. Mavis Stalls on the Lane, Tramway Engines, pages 36 to 41. Percy and the Bicycle, Really Useful Engines, pages 22 to 33. Stop Thief, Really Useful Engines, pages 9, 11, 19 and 21. Further views of the station area are in the book Thomas Comes to Breakfast. The Quarry Tram Road. The quarries are 1.5 miles from Farquhar and some 250 feet higher. The tram road climbs on a serpentine course of some 5.5 miles, with a ruling gradient of 1 in 60. Passing through the stone yard to which raw stone is brought to be cut and cured, Branch Line Engines, pages 51 and 53, the line leaves by an ungated crossing over the Olfstead Road, Branch Line Engines, page 49, and Tramway Engines, pages 37, 39 and 41, and into a lane, Tramway Engines, pages 35 and 39. Heading eastward past the runaway siding, it climbs at 1 in 60 and swinging westward levels off alongside the Arlesburg Road. Here, at the top of the steepest gradient, is the stopboard which Percy once had to ignore disastrously, Branch Line Engines, pages 46 and 47. After another mile, we cross a bridge over a stream. This bridge is shared by both rail and road and was washed away by a flash flood on one occasion, leaving Toby poised precariously, Tramway Engines, pages 51, 53 and 55. A crossroads comes next, and it was here that Thomas, quote, had words with a policeman many years ago. Toby the Tram Engine, pages 20 to 27. The line climbs again, but on an easier gradient, once more changes direction and reaches the quarry from the west. Farquhar Stone has found a ready market both in Sodor and elsewhere. It provides valuable traffic for the branch. When first quarried, it is easily worked, but after a curing period above ground, it becomes very hard and impervious to weathering and air pollution. It is specified widely for municipal and other public buildings, also for bridge and harbour work. Latterly, to cope with increasing production, the quarry company have brought a Drury diesel named Mavis, Tramway Engines, pages 30 to 57, which not only shunts the quarry sidings, but also from time to time ventures down to Farquhar Station. Apart from the platform and shelter at the quarry, mainly used by workmen, there are no other fixed stopping points, but at intervals along the line where there are farms and cottages, Toby stops on request. The service provided is 4 trains a day each way. Freight trains are run as required. Olfstead. This town has no rail connection, but since Farquhar is its nearest station, we include it here. The name derives from Ulf, who came to Sodor in 1067. As Thorkel's trusted lieutenant, Ogmund gave him charge of this strong point, which guards him the approach to Pil Godred. He had built a castle here by 1070. Ulf boasted that he would hold it against all comers till the lake ran dry. He was a jovial man with perpetual thirst. His thirst was really for ale, but his men, in jest, called the lake Chibber Ulf, Ulf's Well, and the name stuck. Ulf's castle defied all efforts of the Scots to take it till their expulsion in 1078. During the resistance period of 1263 to 1404, when Sudrians under their regents repelled all efforts of successive lords of man to take over the island, Ulfstead Castle was many times besieged but never taken. When, however, in 1404, King Henry IV assisted Sudrians in expelling the Percys, Sir Arnold D. Norrenby, the last regent, ceded the castle to the king. Henry restored it to Sir Arnold and at the same time created him Earl of Sodor and Governor of the island. The castle was held for the king throughout the Great Rebellion and the Protectorate. As in the case of Peel Godred, the outworks were so well sited that Roundheads could never get their artillery properly within range. At the Restoration, the Earl abandoned the castle and built himself a mansion in the grounds. By 1965, however, life in the mansion had become impossible and it was sold. The castle itself was offered to the Sodor Island Trust, who gladly accepted it. It was complete and undamaged except for natural decay. Repairs and renewals continue. It is of the greatest interest to archaeologists and military historians. The castle muniments, which include such treasures as the Sigrid Saga and the Book of Sir Harold, are on loan to the Island Record Office at Sudbury. The Earl now lives in a comfortable house on the outskirts of the town. With abundant water power available and with sheep on the surrounding hills, Ulfstead has for centuries been famous for fine cloth. In the 1820s, there were no less than 60 small mills in the valley west and southward of Ulfstead. Now, there are but 2 large mills, but the total output has barely declined. Water wheels and steam engines have been replaced by electricity. The remaining mills now house a variety of industries, some still related to cloth, but most are more closely linked with woodworking, engineering, or electronics. Adequate transport has always been a problem. The River Els was made navigatable for small boats, and a transshipment wharf was built at Elsbridge. A branch line from the Mid-Sodor Railway at Ulfstead Road was hoped for and strongly urged by the Earl, but proved to be impractical. An extension from Farquhar was proposed in the 1920s, but by then a revolution in road transport was getting underway, and Sodor Roadways had been able to offer a more flexible service than the NWR ever could. Through connections for both passengers and freight are provided between Peel Godred, Ulfstead, Farquhar and beyond, while their circular tours in summer have put Ulfstead once more on the visiting industry's map. The town lies in the valley, hemmed in between the lake and castle. Further expansion has had to be up the hillside, and great care is taken to ensure that the character of the place remains unspoilt. There is much to do and see in Ulfstead. Many visitors come for the day and stay for a week. The best hotel is, of course, the castle, the Earl's former mansion, but its prices are correspondingly high. For those with shallower purses, we would recommend either the Raven or the Normanby Arms, where the service is equally good while offering fewer frills. The Arlesburg branch. This is sometimes called the Little Western or Ducks branch line. It is really a single line extension of the main line. It was laid in 1916 by government order. The Admiralty required a strategic railway so that the west coast of the island might be patrolled regularly by armoured trains. The original plan was to extend up to Harwich and establish a small naval base there, but by the time the line reached Arlesburg, the immediate threat had passed and the base established at Arlesburg was deemed sufficient. The Harwich extension was therefore dropped. In addition, the materials from the Arlesdale mine were urgently needed for the war effort, and the line provided a quicker route than by sea. Till 1947, the line paid its way, but with the final closure of the last mine, that at Cusney Howen, the local goods and passenger traffic proved insufficient, and the NWR asked permission to close. This was refused by the Railways Commissioners, but since traffic had fallen right away, a token service only was provided and the line put under minimum maintenance. In 1964-65, however, the need for another port became acute. Arlesburg was thus developed and the branch line reinstated. Since then, weed-resistant ballast from the Arlesdale waste heaps, see small railway engines and Oliver the Western engine, and the visitors attracted by the 15-inch gauge line built to carry the ballast away have, quite apart from the rise in port traffic, given the branch a new lease of life. The branch is worked by 2 push-pull railcar sets, Duck with Alice and Mirabelle and Oliver with Dulcie and Isabel, in full Great Western Railway livery, hence the name Little Western, which in itself is an attraction for rail enthusiasts and visitors. Donald and Douglas, the Caledonian twins, assist with goods and ballast traffic. The passenger service is an hourly one, in conjunction with the Arlesdale Railway timetable. References: Enterprising Engines, pages 56 and 57, Small Railway Engines and Oliver the Western engine. Hull Trough. The derivation of this place name is uncertain. Trough means a sandy beach or low-lying foreshore, but Hull is obscure. Most authorities agree that it is probably a corruption or simplification of a person's name, but they are sharply divided as to which. Your authors are inclined to favour those who say that Hall or Hal is a simplification of Harold, for there is a strong local tradition that it was here that Harold the Black, son of King Ori, landed in 1014 to reclaim his father's kingdom. Harold ruled Sodor and Man for 20 years, from 1014 to 1034. There is certainly a good firm sandy foreshore here favourable for a landing from longships. So in our view, Hull or Hal's Beach is a reasonable interpretation of the place's name. The village is a pleasant summer resort with good clean firm sand. It is rapidly growing in popularity with visitors and holidaymakers. Bathing, however, can be dangerous as tidal currents in the Sudrian Sea are treacherous. To cater for visitors, an open-air sea bathing pool has recently been constructed alongside the harbour jetty. References: the station has an island platform, Enterprising Engines page 57 and Oliver the Western Engine pages 17 and 49. Donald's Duck, Dilly, decides to settle here, Oliver the Western Engine page 16. Bulgy, the pirate bus, wedged himself under the second bridge south of the station, Oliver the Western Engine pages 53 and 55. Bulgy is now a henhouse in a field about half a mile north of Holtroft Station, Oliver the Western Engine page 57. Arlesburg. This is an ancient port. As its name implies, it was a burg or fortified town at the mouth of the River Arle. Situated opposite Douglas, it is likewise a deep water harbour formed by the same geological rift. It was probably stockaded first by King Ori, Godred I. Crovan, Godred II, strengthened it as a base for his first and unsuccessful attempt on the Isle of Man in 1075. Arlesburg has withstood many sieges, not always successfully, but the town has generally held out long enough to enable second lines of defence at Gobby Deegan, Devil's Mouth, and Ulfstead to be put in a state of readiness to repel unwanted visitors. Following the island's acceptance of Henry IV in 1404, Arlesburg's defences were no longer needed and fell into disrepair. Very little now remains. The place has always been a port and had a period of high prosperity in the 18th century when mining began in Arlesdale. This rose to a peak from 1880 to 1930 when Arlesburg was a recognised calling place for the Isle of Man Steam Packet Company steamers from Douglas and Ramsey. The Mid-Sodor Railway, see below, operated a boat train service in connection with the steamers. The steamer service ended when the Mid-Sodor closed its passenger service in 1936, and when the last mine in the valley closed in 1947, the port fell into sad decay. Revival began in 1965 to 66 when the NWR decided to use the port as a supplement to Tidmouth. They relaid the harbour extension, built new jetties and installed up-to-date dockside equipment. The 15-inch gauge Arlesdale Railway does not generate much port traffic as the ballast it carries is taken away by rail, but it does bring visitors and therefore trade to an interesting old town which is a useful starting point for the exploration of a very lovely valley. References: the small Arlesdale Railway engines are shedded here, Small Railway Engines pages 11 and 34 and Duke the Lost Engine page 49. Duck meets Bert, Mike and Rex, Small Railway Engines pages 7, 9 and 11. Ballast transfer arrangements from 15-inch gauge wagons to those of standard gauge Small Railway Engines pages 7 and 9. Standard gauge engine shed Oliver the Western Engine pages 6, 7, 9, 11, 15 and 37. The station has one platform only, Oliver the Western Engine pages 39 and 51. The platform, run-round and goods roads end in a turntable, Oliver the Western Engine page 51. Oliver falls down the well of the turntable, Oliver the Western Engine pages 29 and 31. Oliver pulls Scruffy in half, Oliver the Western Engine pages 38 till the end. Duck meets Bulgy, the pirate bus, in the station yard, Oliver the Western Engine pages 45 to 51. Harwick. Since Arlesburg is railhead for Harwick, we feel that some notes about the town may appropriately be inserted here. The derivation of this place's name, like Holtroft, is obscure. Wick means an inlet or creek, but the prefix causes difficulty. Some authorities hold that Har comes from a mispronunciation, originally Norse from the river name Oar. Others maintain it is a corruption of Haraldswick. We ourselves are among them, for the probability is that King Harold the Black frequently used it on journeys between the islands. The Ogmund saga records that his son, Godred Crovan, chose Harwick in 1079 as the embarkation point for his troops when he conquered Man. A Norman army landed landed here in 1094 but were beaten off by Sigmund. Harwick was rebuilt and refortified, and regular watch was kept from the heights of Cregwear and Claghoyer during the whole times of the kingdom and regency, from 1099 to 1404. Harwick appeared to offer a convenient, quote, back-door approach to Peel Godred, but the valley behind was so rough and boulder-strewn that it gave abundant cover for the ambushing of an invading force. Those who tried it once rarely had the temerity to do it again. Even the Roundheads, with all their determination, got no further than Drogon y Claggan. In their case, a flood was let loose from Lowy Matchen, which caught them in that narrow gorge and swept them, horse, foot and guns back to the sea. Saint Matchen, claimed Sudrians, always looked after his own. During the 18th century, Harwick, through its isolation, became a haunt of smugglers who, like those at Tidmouth, alternated as fishermen. The northern coast was ideal for their purpose, and Man was close at hand. The valley of the Uer is honeycombed with caves, in which cargoes could be hidden and transferred secretly one to another should the need arise. The quote, trade continued well on into the 19th century. Great poverty resulted from its final suppression, but by the 1850s it was hoped that a railway, the Cronk-and-Harwick, would provide honest work and to help solve the problem. A fine new pier was built, with stone quarried in the valley and some 12 miles of track laid as far as Cregwear before the money ran out. The line was horseworked, and though this and other quarries remained in production till the 1950s, the railway had long since worn out. It was shown as still in being but abandoned on the 1973 map, but it had actually been pulled up for scrap during World War II. In 1915 and again in 1940, a small naval base was established at Harwick from which the north and west coasts of the island were patrolled. A rail link with Arlesburg was again proposed, but yet again deemed unnecessary, for it was found that Sodor roadways could provide adequate transport both for stores and personnel. The town remains a small one, with a population of 5,869 in 1981. There are a lighthouse, a lifeboat station, and a Coast Guard establishment here. It remains a fishing port, and a private firm has recently begun a ferry service to and from Ramsey, with return trips twice daily in summer and 3 days a week in winter. Harwick has also become a holiday resort of a special kind. It lies off the tourist track and is only given brief mention in the guidebooks. This casts no aspersion but is deliberate policy. Harwick thus remains a place where Sudrians can enjoy a summer holiday in their own island without finding themselves crowded off the beaches by visitors from overseas.